live. We've got that delay of the length of the meeting. So, welcome everyone to the Greater Manchester Police and Crime Panel. Have we had any apologies, Steve? Thank you, yeah. We can accept those apologies, and I've got the sad news to announce. I know we are a relatively new being as being the Greater Manchester Police and Crime Panel, but one of our kind of predecessing groups was chaired by a councillor called Stephen Murphy from from Wigan, who passed away this week. He was the chair of the what was it? Police Authority. We're going forward for many years, and I think if we can notice that passing and pass on our condolences to his family and to his colleagues over in Wigan, I think we'd like to do that. Okay, so I'm going to move on, and as we said at the last meeting, we're going to ask for an update on the IOPS system, and we're very pleased to welcome the Assistant Chief Constable, Chris Sykes, who's going to give us a brief update. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Afternoon, everybody. My name's Chris Sykes. I'm Assistant Chief Constable in Greater Manchester Police, and I've been working on IOPS recently. So I believe at your last meeting, Chair, Chief Constable Ian Hopkins came and gave a comprehensive update. So my intention is to basically update on the 4 or 5 weeks since that last meeting, if that's okay. So since the Chief came to the last meeting, the work has continued to really focus on building confidence with our frontline officers and staff who are using IOPS on a day-to-day basis. IOPS is a complete upgrade to our old systems, a upgrade to the system that we use to handle our 101-999 calls, our records management system, our frontline mobile technology, and our data warehouse. And our staff obviously have been used to using the old system, some of them for many, many years. So the focus of our work is around confidence building, training, and helping them understand how to get the best out of the new technology. Since the last meeting as well has been an upgrade, we are now on version 2.4 of PoliceWorks. This is an upgrade to our records management system. This was always planned to be an upgrade several months after we've gone live. That upgrade took place on Thursday and went successfully. What our staff report back to us is a number of things. First of all is them getting used to a new system. We're dealing with that with training, mentoring, help videos, help advice, and super users. They also talk to us about the performance of the system, which is often when they are finding that some tasks are slower than they're used to, some tasks are quicker. What we can do is deploy our technical experts into particular areas. As recently as we sent some to Tameside Safeguarding Hub to look at the processes and to learn how we can make them better. There has been some performance systems on the servers and with things like load balancers as the system gets used to the demands that are getting put on it because it works in a different way from the others, and that is a continuing amount of work for us to focus on that sort of what I call the fine-tuning of the performance system. The final bit is about returning Greater Manchester Police to what I would call business as usual. But I do think, and I do want to iterate to the panel here, is we do need to understand what the new norm is for our technology and the amount of work it carries. Since it went live, it has operated well through very serious incidents across Greater Manchester Police, large events, protests, a political party conference, where the system handled the situations that were presented to it very well. It can create between 800 and 1,000 crimes a day reported into it, and it's doing that very successfully. What we now need to do is look about how we support our staff in getting the best out of the system, planning for the next major upgrade, which is January, February, which brings big improvements to crime and intelligence, and how we enter 2020 with the system supporting Greater Manchester citizens as we wanted it to do, being that platform for future developments. When I talk about future developments, it's things like integration with other agencies, being able to share data much more frequently and slicker with other agencies. It's about further work on our mobile phones so that officers don't have to come into police stations to complete work. And it's actually about putting better information into the hands of those officers to make the right decisions at the time when they're dealing with the victims. Personally, from my point of view, The staff are coping brilliantly. I'm always really proud to be a police officer in Greater Manchester Police, and the officers and staff are doing a great job. Lots has changed in their world, and they're coping brilliantly with that. What I'm committed to do is trying to support them as much as possibly as they try and work out how to get the best out of the system and use it so that our victims of crime, the citizens that need us, are getting a better service from GMP. So thank you for the chance to give an update, Chair. I was asked to keep it quite brief because I'm expecting some questions. So I've done that, and I hope that's been sufficient. And then I'll try and answer any questions, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. And we'll open that straight up to questions. I've got Mike, I've got Stephen, and I've got Kevin. I'll tell you in two, so do Mike and Stephen, then I'll do Kevin and Majid. Thank you. Mike.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that update. I've got three really quite succinct questions. The first one's on open crimes, which we know from Operation Alban and incidents you're trying to reduce. Can you categorically give assurances that crime incidents with positive leads of inquiry are not being closed down as part of the efforts being made to reduce the number of open crimes? Secondly, incidents involving vulnerability in children, can you give the same assurance that they're being promptly identified and actioned by the system to relevant personnel to follow up and to LA safeguarding teams where necessary? And finally, ACC Sykes, we do know from the press that HMIC have paid a visit. Is there any early feedback you can give us today about that visit and what they saw when they came in? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello again, Chris. Chris, two questions. One of them, my first one is, if you had a bobby, and to use the words, being a little bolshy, thinking, this ain't right for me, this is not working, what would you say to that officer to convince he or she that that's the right way you should be going? And if you don't mind, can I ask you an earlier question that I asked you previously? If it comes to measuring IOPS in terms of percentages of how good it's got since we last met with Ian Hopkins, say if it was 50% successful and you're trying to achieve this brilliance, this technical brilliance, how much better would you say it is now? Thank you.
Councillor Freeman, open crime queues. I think it was reported in the press that the open crime went up from about 25,000 in our old system to 42,000. That's standing today at a 36,000 open crimes. Remember, these are crimes that are with officers for investigation. What I can categorically say, if I can say the word categorically, is there is no change to the policy on closing crimes. We are not closing crimes. I've changed our policy to clear backlogs. It's about supporting officers so they understand how to close crimes, that they go through a supervisor that checks that there is no lines of inquiry. There's been no change to the policy. We're slowly, we're putting extra resources into the teams that do close crimes to get through the fact that we left them open, but there's no change to the policy. Yeah, vulnerability, it has been a real focus for me. It's on things like care plans and domestic abuse plans. It has been a real focus on the team. And we have put technical teams and confidence building teams out into every safeguarding hub. We've gone around every district to have a look at how it's working in those teams. And absolutely, as you say in council, those teams did see an increase in the number of open care plans and open domestics. Now, I want to be really clear, they will always have those open, and it's really important that they have them open. And there is a level that's too low, and is wrong because it's too low. It's understanding what the new norm is. So again, there was a number that we were up at 8,000 of those open, and when we were around about 4,200 during the summer. We're just over 6,000 at the moment, so those queues are coming down. And the safeguarding hubs are making sure they triage those plans as they come in to make sure they understand what are high, what are medium, what are low, and what's the risk in those systems. And they've been given extra support to do that. The third one is the HMIC. And the Chief Constable invited HMIC in to provide us reassurance that our plans to return Greater Manchester Police's demand down to BNU were strong and sound. So they've come in and done the field work, the spoken to staff. There's not anything so far I've had from the initial feedback when I was interviewed that was new to me. They'll obviously produce a report. My guess, councillor, is that report will probably, I'll probably know a lot of that already. It'll say things like lots of our staff are getting used to a new system. They're having to have their confidence built in it. We need to continue to train them, to give them support. Those are sorts of things I'm expecting in that report, but I've had no really early feedback yet. Councillor, the convincing the Bobby who doesn't like it. I must say that our new recruits and transferees and other forces are finding the system easier to use than officers that have been using our old system for many years. Lots of them are finding the fact that they used an old system that had been fine-tuned for policing for 10, 15, 20 years. And we'd spent 15, 20 years getting it better. And we bought a new system, which is off the shelf. And please, this is an off-the-shelf product that has not been specially designed for GMP. And in that system, there are some things that are slower than our old system in a way that certain processes are done. So police officers that will have seen that will think, this isn't very good, it's slower than the old one. We're trying to explain to them the bigger picture. We're trying to show them the connectivity with mobile and how mobile's now much improved. They're getting on-the-spot training to help them do their work better. It's really easy for them to see their demands now, which they didn't before. So pointing out the benefits is building some confidence, but Councillor, it is going to take some time. And I think the measure of how our officers will be feeling will be probably 12 months on as we brought in the further upgrades, and we spent all the time till next summer working side by side with them to improve how they feel about it. It's difficult to put percentage increases on things. The upgrade... Well, thank you. I personally feel that the code has improved by about 5%, if I was to put a number on it, with the 2.4 version that we launched on Thursday. That has brought enhancements, 96 enhancements to it. I think, generally across the whole piece, we are seeing performance improve by about 10%, but there is more work to be done. We've got to work on this, it hasn't crashed and the system hasn't collapsed, but sometimes it slows, and we need to understand why it slows and improve that. Because what officers get really frustrated with is what they call the spinny wheel, they call it the spinny donut of death, where it slows up. And that's normally because of the amount of demand in there and how it's using the hardware to manage it. But things I would say, with the speed is about 10% better, but more to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, thanks for your honest update. It's appreciated. Can I just ask you really, obviously with any new IT system, there's bound to be some hiccups. And that's a fact of life, I think, in any type of organisation. But how would you class progress which has been made? Is it as well as you'd planned for initially, or do you think you're behind schedule, or there's more issues than you anticipated? Obviously, I've had feedback in terms of some of the legacy information from the old system transferring across. And also, we have updates. I think you recognise it's important that those updates and what they do are explained to everybody in the relevant training is actually rolled. Have there been any contract issues with Capita? And, basically I would look towards, how would you assess the implementation of the computer system so far?
Thank you, Kevin. Majid.
Yeah, Chris, did you say that this was an off-the-shelf system? So were some of these problems that we're having at GMP anticipated when we sort of bought the system in? And if so, were we appropriately planned to address them at the offset?
Okay, thank you. Lots of questions there. First of all, I think progress, and how do I feel about the implementation? How well it did? I think is what you're asking. So I actually think the launch of ControlWorks into our OCB, our Operational Communications Branch that deals with 999s and 101s, has been excellent. I think our staff in there, police officers and police staff, mainly police staff, have done an absolutely brilliant job getting used to a brand new system. They're the ones at the front line taking those distressing 999 calls and 101 calls, capturing as much quality data that they can so they can dispatch an officer. And I think the launch of ControlWorks, I wish we could celebrate it because it's been excellent. Lots of other forces have had ControlWorks, and even the software supplier says that GMP has managed that better than any it's seen. So that's real success. The problem is with one element of it, which is our records management system, which is police. So it's when I say a problem, it's that our staff are finding the hardest. So again, when we went live, the implementation of PoliceWorks worked really well, but I think our staff have gone into shock with about some of the things they find much harder to do than in the previous system. So we were set back by about 4 to 5 weeks, I think, which the Chief has already explained. But since then, we have been on track. So the upgrade last week was on track. The next major one is that one, as I said, in January, February, which brings extra enhancements. At the moment, that's on track as well. We cannot do enough communication, though, with our officers, showing them how to do it. So things like showing them how to get access to, we've saved all our data, it's all in there. Officers need to understand how to access it in different ways from they did before. So that's where we need to focus, building confidence in them, training them, getting them support from super users, making them feel like we're listening to them and fixing things that they don't like as quickly as possible. And that's where the concentration of our effort needs to be. With regards to all the different suppliers, GMP has robust conversations and really good contracts with all the suppliers, and I think that's all would be appropriate for me to say. Yes, Councillor, it was, I'm sorry, you're an independent rep, sorry about that. It is an off-the-shelf product. You cannot anticipate, though, how that off-the-shelf product works on a complicated network across the whole of Greater Manchester and on our data centres and our servers. That's always different in every police force. Also, there's not many other police forces that have bought the full package that we have, so we have a fully integrated package. But certainly, we did learn quite a lot from Durham and Cumbria. We learned quite a bit from Derbyshire that have got control works. And we're helping other places as well. So we are part of, police in England and Wales. The West Midlands Police Force are going to go live with part of IOPS pretty soon, the control works application, and we've supported them in understanding things. We've been helping Police Service of Northern Ireland, which I think have had a much tougher experience with control works than we have. So the police forces work well together to help to understand it. And in the past, we've been heavily criticised by Sir Tom Windsor, as the police have, about we are not using technology, we are not doing transformation. And my challenge back to Sir Tom and the HMIC would, it is really, really difficult. We're showing you how difficult it is, but you need the time and the space and the investment to get the best out of it. So ultimately, you've got the best platform for the future. This is a platform that's going to last 5, 10, 15 years like the old one did, and it has to be ready for the Internet of Things, the way that mobile is going to change, 5G, and you can't run it on old-fashioned DOS-based systems.
I've got David that's indicated. Is anybody else that plans to ask a question? David.
It's just a quick one. Communication, I agree with you, is critical. And it's to put a system in as important as this one is, communication is vital. You've done the visits to the divisions. How do you communicate back to the divisions issues which they've raised to actually draw? So it might be useful if some of those can be shared with our divisional commanders.
Mm. So I really don't want to sound defensive here. I'm trying not to sound defensive. We have put out so much comms. So I get criticised for too much or too little or not right. So the bit that's really important is about officers saying that we've got a top 10 list of the top 10 things that officers don't like. And we've got those, and we're trying to work on improving those. We have communicated all those things back to every district. And we put that out in a weekly engagement email that we have that goes to every district. Superintendents, the chief superintendents have that. So in your area, I mean, I had a call with Sean Donnellan the other day where I briefed him on the improvements we're trying to make. So it is hard to communicate everything when you've got such a complex IT system in all areas, but it's very clear. The biggest thing, Councillor, for the staff's point of view is that if it works more quickly, they'd feel a lot better. They don't like seeing it freeze in the spinny wheel. That's the key bit. They then want us to improve the search facility, and we can improve the search facility, and we're going to do that. There's then a part of it is about training. So it does provide a lot of information about what's gone on in an officer's area. So an officer's area, it does. There's lots of information that it puts onto these mobile phones that the officers are now getting used to. So all those things, as the staff get used to it, you'll see them, some of them are starting to, it's the change curve, isn't it? They're in shock, then they get used to it, and at some point, some of them will be saying this is better than what we've had before.
Thanks, Chris. Bev, would you say a few words?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that this has been a difficult process, and probably, Chris, you'd agree, more difficult than we'd have wanted and maybe anticipated, certainly in the early weeks. But I'd just like to repeat what Chris said at one point there, was that we had no option but to completely transform the computer and the IT system. The fact that many of our staff, were dealing with very outdated and clunky equipment and had got used to the workarounds that they developed, and you feel comfortable with that, don't you? You do it yourself with all kinds of things. And then to move to something completely different, what was a great challenge. And I just wanted to assure members of the panel really of two things. Firstly, there is continuing and detailed scrutiny of the situation as it's changing and developing between me and my team and the Chief Constable and Chris and his team. We are looking and interrogating this the whole time because we want to make sure that progress continues to go in the right direction as it is. And secondly, that channels of communication are open both to the divisions but also in terms of safeguarding particularly to the local authority districts now, and that channel of those channels of communication are very close and two-way, and I think we've got that system going better. I think the communications and training is critical, and that needs to continue, albeit there's a lot gone on. But I just wanted to thank members and also your colleagues in the district who, notwithstanding some of the issues they've been dealing with, have been really helpful in trying to help us to get on top of these things. And I think that is crucial that we carry on doing that. Thank you.
Thanks. I do thank Chris for the update today. I used an analogy earlier. I think the systems we had within GMP were the equivalent of having a Nokia 3310, and now we're using the latest iPhone. And I think doing that big change is always going to be difficult to come on board. And equally, having someone that's been in the IT industry, if something's going to go wrong, it's a lot easier to blame IT than yourself sometimes as well. So I do thank you for the work that's going on, and I know that it will be and it is improving on a day-to-day basis, and we look forward to the updates in the future. So thanks for that, and we'll let you get back to it, Chris. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks. We're going to move on then to item 3. We've got declarations of interest. Councillor Freeman.
Yeah, Chair, and I've given Steve the forms, but just to declare on item 6 that I'm an occupational pensioner of Greater Manchester Police.
Okay, any other interests? No. Moving on then, we have got the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of September. Firstly, are people happy they're a correct record? I've noticed one amendment actually. Majid has managed to be present and send apologies. I think it's actually his apologies that were actually logged. Other than that, are people happy they're a correct record? Brilliant, flying through. Okay, moving on then to item 5, which is the Standing Together Outworks Framework. And who's leading on that? Bev's going to start on that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll start by way of introduction and then pass over to my two colleagues who are instrumental in developing this, Peter Langley-Jones and Sarah Barnes, and I'm very grateful for the work they've done on this. You've had information about this right from the start when we were developing the police and crime plan, when we said that as a new venture, we wanted to develop an outcomes framework around the commitments in the plan, so that we together, that's you and I, and all our partners in the districts actually could get a sense of the progress that we're making, not only at the GM level, but also at district level. And I'll say a bit about that in a moment. The framework has been developed by Sarah and Peter with colleagues and consultation throughout the districts, but we've also commissioned an independent company to do the survey work. So what you've got here today, which they will go through, is the outcome, the results from the first survey. Just to remind you, we're going to do a survey every quarter of a representative sample of citizens from across the 10 districts. So this is the first cut. It doesn't tell us that much on its own, but over time, we'll obviously be able to see trends, and over time, we will make the framework interactive. So in your districts, you will be able to get into the results from the surveys of citizens in your own particular local authority area. And you'll also be able to look at those of other districts, and you'll be able to make comparisons. At this level, we're only going to publish the GM data at the GM level. But for other purposes within your own authorities, you'll be able to look at the data for the individual districts. I think there's some important kind of indications already, though, in these results from this first survey in terms of people's feelings about community safety and their knowledge and awareness of the different kind of, actors, the police and the community safety partnerships that have a role in that. And we're also asking people about their kind of levels of satisfaction with what's being done in terms of promoting community safety. And I think those are the indices, particularly the performance indices, that we'll be interested over time to see if, as a result of the work that's going into meeting the commitments in the plan, we're having a discernible impact on people's feelings of safety and security. So, and that, as I say, is a new venture for us here in Greater Manchester. So, Sarah, Peter, can I hand over to you for some of the, is that all right with you, Chair?
Perfect. Looking about 20 minutes in total.
I wonder why you said that. So the outcomes framework draws data from a variety of different places, and you'll see some examples of that in a second. But the new kid, as Bev has said, is the survey, which was contract was let in January. We spent most of this year working with that provider to carefully design the survey. First results now available. Truth be known, this meeting has come slightly early, so you're not going to get a full breakdown of the results, but you'll get a number of the headlines that have emerged from the first findings. It's mostly a phone survey of 3,250 Greater Manchester residents, which is fairly easy maths. That divides by 10 to give you 325 for each district. For those who are difficult to reach by phone, there's some topping up, either by an online version of the survey or some face-to-face interviewing. It's quota sampling, so when you look at the breakdown of respondents, things like gender, age and ethnicity are, as you might expect for Greater Manchester. That's because the sample is a quota based on the residential population. We also track some other protected characteristics like religion, disability, sexuality, working status, and then a self-defined assessment of financial status, which is based on answering questions about what individuals or their household can afford. So it ranges from I can afford luxuries as well as essentials to I can rarely afford essentials. Now, the reason I'm drawing attention to that is when we get into some of the other findings, there's some quite interesting differences based on that spread, albeit relatively low responses to some of them, which tees up the other thing that Bev mentions. Because this is going to run on a quarterly basis, we will also get an accumulating sample. So those subsamples will grow, which will enrich the sort of analysis that we can undertake. The one on the right-hand side of the screen is slightly odd, maybe, as a characteristic of the respondents. This is where they prefer to socialise within Greater Manchester. The reason for asking that question is there's a question in a moment about how they feel, how safe they feel whilst socialising in their home district. So 44% of the respondents, excuse me, had what you might call a community safety experience in the preceding 12 months. The longer bars at the top of this graphic relate to things like crime, antisocial behaviour, either as victim or witness, and include things like road traffic collisions. But they also go into other experiences as well. I suppose the other take home from this is the majority, 56% of the respondents hadn't had a community safety experience in the preceding 12 months. 31%, which is obviously a different number to the 44% on the previous slide, had contact, at least one contact, with one or more community safety organisation. So what that means is there are some people who have a community safety experience but don't contact an organisation. So of the 31 that had a contact, the majority, or the biggest number, had contact with Greater Manchester Police, which dominates the screen at the top. At the bottom is the 69% who'd had no contact with any organisation. So in terms of feelings of safety, there are 4 measures, feelings of safety. So starting at the top of the screen, how safe do you feel when in your local area? Local area is defined as within a 5-minute walk of home, which is still quite a large area for some people if you think about that. 86% of the respondents felt very safe or fairly safe in their local area. If we're going down the screen, we then ask people, how safe do you feel when socialising anywhere in your home district? So the district where you're resident, which is the reason for asking the question earlier on about where do you actually socialise. So in the future, what we'll be able to do is to separate those two things out. Notice on the left-hand side, this only relates to those people who socialise. So there were 507 people who said that they don't socialise, so the numbers are based on those that do, and 81% of those felt very or fairly safe whilst they were socialising. Of the 1,645 who work in Greater Manchester, so there are filter questions to take out those people who work outside Greater Manchester, the question doesn't relate to them. Of those who work in Greater Manchester, 90% felt very or fairly safe whilst at work. And then of the 387 at the bottom of the screen, 91% felt very or fairly safe in their place of study. So all in excess of 80%. The headline one, how safe do you feel at home, running at 86%. But in some ways, the more interesting question isn't that one, it's the one that followed, which was, and why do you say that? So we asked people why they felt safe or why they didn't feel safe. So of those who felt very or fairly safe in their local area, at home, if you like, these are the sorts of things that they said. We got a total of 3,753 reasons for feeling safe, and here are the most popular, most frequently suggested, the top 10. The top 4 largely relate to place. So it's a quiet area, it's a nice area, it's an area with a friendly community, it's somewhere where they've lived for a long time. And then if we go down the list, we go into experiences, either awareness of antisocial behaviour or awareness of crime. So even though they feel safe, they will still say that they've experienced crime and antisocial behaviour. Some would say that it's hard to answer the question because it varies by time of day. What you're looking at now is why people say they felt very unsafe or fairly unsafe. And what dominates here are experiences, either first or third party, of antisocial behaviour, crime, and the perception that there is a lack of a police presence in the area. What we've also been able to do is to cut the data by the characteristics of the respondents. So going from left to right, there is no difference in feelings of safety in the local area, whether you consider male and female respondents, no difference between how safe or unsafe they feel. There is a suggestion of a difference with increasing age. As the respondents' age increased, they felt, or were more likely to say that they felt safe, which is a slight surprise to us and maybe counterintuitive. Ethnicity, BAME respondents were more likely to say that they felt very or fairly unsafe than white respondents. And the reason I drew attention to the financial status before is that there's an interesting pattern emerging here, which is something that we will monitor with successive waves. But what this suggests is, with increasing financial challenge, the more deprived the household, if you like, there are lower levels of safety. So the more deprived the individual, the less safe they feel. Or if you want to play that the other way around, the more affluent the household or the individual, the safer they feel. On the right-hand side of this graphic, people who had contact with police or people who had witnessed or been victim of crime, their feelings of safety were lower as well, which makes intuitive sense that if you've had a crime or antisocial behaviour experience, you feel less safe.
So we've always been very clear that when we developed the outcomes framework that it wouldn't just sit entirely based on police recorded crime, that we would have a range of data measures to help inform that. And by the same token, although there's been a lot of interest with the survey, we've been very clear that the survey needs to sit in relation to the other data that is available. So thinking about recorded crime of personal and household crime, what we see is Greater Manchester in the blue line is significantly higher than both the national and regional averages. However, we show a different trend at Greater Manchester level where we're actually either stabilising or reducing in those crime types, and we've reduced the difference between our national level by 13% for personal crime and 21% for household crime. And you can see the reduction a bit easier in these lines, where you can see that there is a downward trend whereas other areas of the UK are seeing a more upward trend. What we've tried to do is look at not just how many crimes are recorded, but actually what types of crimes are recorded. And the Office of National Statistics has a measure that gives an indication of how serious crime is. And what we can see, again, Greater Manchester in the blue. So on the left-hand side, you see a graph that is number of offences per 1,000 population. So again, shows that we're actually we have a greater number of offences. But we're also markedly higher in the seriousness of those offences. So not only do we have more crime in Greater Manchester, we have more serious crime. We've also done a piece of work that looks at modelling types of crime that can be predicted. So we've worked very closely with the London School of Economics, who ran a statistical model to look at how you can predict crime. So we know that not all crime occurs in all areas, but actually instead of just looking at numbers of crime that occurs in all areas, what would you expect, given the demographics and the geographic makeup of that area, what would you expect crime levels to look like? And the London School of Economics have found that actually there's a really good relationship, and you can really accurately predict crime levels based on the demographic of the people, but also the physical makeup of an area. So we've applied that logic to the Greater Manchester area, and what we find is, if we look at this bar here, that you get 72% of, we've broken Greater Manchester down into 343 different areas, and 72% of those fit into what we would class as predicted. 18% have a lower than predicted area, and about 10% have a higher than predicted area. And what we're hoping is that this gives opportunity for conversations to happen to understand what it is that's going on in those areas that are either higher or lower that we can learn from, and where we might more effectively target resources. Interestingly, if we look at different crime types, for domestic abuse, we have almost half of our areas are higher than would be predicted. But interestingly, again, for violent crime at the bottom, 37%, so around just over a third of our areas are actually lower than, given the makeup of the area, than we would expect. So what is it that's going on in those areas that we can either learn from for sharing best practice, or is it that we need to engage better with our communities because maybe they're not reporting to the police? A strong theme in the Standing Together plan is about repeat victimisation. And it's a bit small on the screen, but this group of blue here is the number of people who are repeatedly victimised in the space of 12 months. And that's a relatively static figure, and that's true if you look at the actual number of offences as well as the proportion of offences. Really, really small, but just right at the top is this group of very dark blue, which is people who have been victimised 5 times or more in the previous 12 months. And that is a growing proportion. If you then again break that down by different crime types, you again see differences. So we've got a growing proportion of domestic abuse victims who are repeatedly victimised, as well as hate crime and violent crime, whereas for victim-based crime, as I said, is relatively static. We also look at what happens with investigative outcomes. So what do the police, and we had a question earlier about what the police are doing once they've had a crime reported. So what we find is that just over half of crimes are suspects never identified. But we do have this growing proportion of victims who don't support a prosecution, so then they either withdraw their statement or decide that they don't want to go through prosecution for whatever reason. And that again changes by crime type. So we have this growing trend of people not supporting the police and the prosecution for domestic abuse. And what we found is when we've done some analysis is that that's related to crime recording and improvements that Greater Manchester Police have made to crime recording. It's linked strongly there. Household crime, we very, very rarely identify anyone who's committed a household crime such as burglary. But what we do find for sexual crimes is that there's a huge proportion, much bigger than any other crime type that we looked at, for evidential difficulties, which perhaps we would expect when we get issues around consent. Pass over to Peter again.
Thank you. Confidence is something which is frequently explored in surveys, but often it's a free-floating consideration. So what we've tried to do is ground this in confidence in whom, in what situation. So how confident are you that you could get the help from Greater Manchester Police in an emergency? So we're giving people a scenario to answer the question within. So the answer to that question from the respondents was 59%. 59% of respondents were very confident or fairly confident in an emergency that they could get help from Greater Manchester Police. If you look at the graphic, there are 8% of people who didn't know. So some people struggled to answer that question because they didn't have a direct experience. Similar question, different scenario. How confident are you could get help from Greater Manchester Police in a non-emergency? And it's fair to say that we left the respondents to self-define what they meant by emergency or non-emergency. And our experience of 999 would suggest that some people are very generous in how they might define what an emergency is. But by their definition, 39% were very confident or fairly confident that they could get help in a non-emergency. A slightly larger proportion didn't know when asked that question. Now, again, in many ways, the more interesting question isn't that headline, it's the supplementary question, which is, and why did you say that? So of those who were very or fairly confident, these are their answers, there is a residual faith, a residual confidence in the police as an organisation, came out as the most frequent answer. 35% of those who were confident said that. The difficulty in answering it was also reflected in the next one. No first-hand experience, difficult to answer the question, but general positive experiences. And what you'll find is there are a mixture of perceptions and experiences going down there. Of those who lacked confidence, what dominated were lack of resources, lack of funds, a lack of confidence that police would be able to respond, comments about police station closures. Again, a mixture of perceptions and experiences, experiences either first-hand or by word of mouth, third-party experiences. Very similar for the answers to the confidence in a non-emergency, so residual confidence in police, mixture of perception and experience, and the things associated with lack of confidence in a non-emergency, largely about resourcing and police prioritising emergency over non-emergency. If that's considered by some of the demographic characteristics, a couple of things to notice. On emergencies, there seems to be the same pattern around the financial challenge of the household. And then we went on to ask a question about community safety partnerships. To what extent was there agreement that the CSP was dealing with community safety issues? 40% agreed strongly or tended to agree. The thing to note more than anything is the 36% who didn't know. I'll skip around these, which is across all the different characteristics of the respondents, this lack of knowledge about what the CSP does or who the CSP is. I'll skip that one.
So, excuse me, the last few slides are related to kind of cohesion or experiences in our perceptions of local area. I will note that we didn't have the room in the survey to ask the why did you say that question, so those aren't included here. But we did ask this to get a bit of a better understanding of place. And what we find is that actually most people tell us quite positive things about where they live. So that, so different backgrounds get on well together. The majority of people agree with that. An area where people look out for each other, again, people tended to agree with that. But going back to some of Peter's earlier points, particularly around people's perceptions of their financial status in the household and links to ethnicity, there were differences across those different demographics for those questions. Sense of belonging, again, the majority of people felt that there was a sense of belonging. However, there was you can see a marked difference here for the question about I get a say in what happens in my local area, where actually it flips and now we have a majority of people saying they don't feel that they have a say in what happens in their local area. And some of the, here around the feelings of belonging and having a say, again, you can see those same patterns of those same groups coming out here. Most people felt they were proud of their local area and that it was well maintained, but again we see this same pattern in the demographics highlighted as to people who have more or less pride or feel that their area is well maintained. Interestingly, what we did as well was we compared those who feel safe in their local area with their responses to these kind of more place-based questions. And what you find is that those people who felt less safe tended to give more negative responses to these areas as well, which is quite interesting and is some of the kind of more early level analysis that we've done. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you and well done. I think it's one of those areas where you can actually be speaking for the whole of the meeting and we'd still have more questions and stuff going on because it's a great starter and the information we're going to be gathering over the future surveys is very, very useful. I'm going to open it up to questions. Any questions? I'm going to get a comment from... we'll go in reverse. We'll go Janet and then Mike.
Just to ask, when will this be public and how much of it will be public? Obviously.
Just the comment on community safety partnerships, it didn't surprise me one little bit that percentage of people haven't got a clue about what's going on, despite all the good work, and that is a key thing and a key message we have to get across.
Good.
Okay, a couple of things. In terms of the 69% who didn't make contact with the community safety, about community safety experience, there wasn't any follow-up question as to why that was. And secondly, in terms of going back to the public, I appreciate this is only Q1, but at what point do we intend to go back to the public and said you had these issues and challenges, and this is what we're going to do about it?
Okay, I'll take the middle one as that. I'll take it the middle one wasn't a question; that was just a statement. Some of it's public as of today because this is a public forum. The intention will be to make the GM level data public once we've completed the analysis, which is likely to be by the end of November. In terms of the 69, it was 69% of the respondents hadn't had a contact. You shouldn't hear that as they had had an experience and hadn't contacted. It will include people who had no reason to have a contact.
One of the things was on about number of no local police stations. Because there hasn't been many closure of police stations as far as I'm aware. So I was a bit surprised at the percentage of people who'd raised that as an issue. Well, the issue which I really thought would have been in there somewhere is it's one thing knowing about the community safety partnership, but it's more important that they know about the neighbourhood provision for policing and community safety. And are they asking the question how much they are aware of the activities at a local level in neighbourhood levels?
Okay, before bringing Peter in, is there any other questions from members of the panel? No? We'll go for Peter and then get back to someone.
The question doesn't focus on the geography, but what we will be able to do in the fullness of time is process the answers by geography, because what we do get is a more localised indication of where the interviewees are located. So it's not a direct question about neighbourhood, but we can locate the responses more at a smaller geography than the district.
Brilliant, Peter. And oh, sorry, Kevin's decided to jump in.
Just to say that, obviously, I'd be very interested to see the district breakdown. And the other thing that stood out as well was the large percentage of in terms of more reports of domestic abuse as well. And that still shows that, you know, what a big issue that is within a lot of districts and across GM itself. Just in terms of Councillor Lancaster's comment about closure of police stations, I think although not police stations themselves have been closed, I think public access counters have closed over the years, and that can have a similar effect as well.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I mean, firstly, apologise about the size of the screen here, but when we produced the slides, we didn't know we were going to be here. The magnification of the projection would have been much greater in Churchgate House. And had we known that, we'd have sent the slides out to you in advance. But if anyone would like them now, to take, to send you them after the meeting, then we're really happy to do that. So we'll do that. Just Councillor Lancaster's point, yes, it's just got me pondering really, because I think you could argue that although the neighbourhood policing resource is an important one, it should be one, shouldn't it, that's tied into the community safety partnership, and that's the kind of access for the citizen, yeah. So I think it is instructive and something we need to think about, that people are saying that they're not so strongly aware of that as they are of the police. And it just touches something that I'm going to be talking about in other meetings, because I really want to strengthen the links between neighbourhood policing and CSPs, and between CSPs and the work that we're doing at a Greater Manchester level. So one of the things I've done is made each member of my team responsible for one of your areas to link directly with each community safety partnership, so that we can get that direct link. We had, and some people here were at the meeting, we had a meeting on Tuesday between the members of this panel that could make it and the chairs of the scrutiny panels in each of the districts. And again, it's about forging those links a bit better and making everything a bit more visible to people, and making sure the citizens get the benefit of that. In terms of the point about, you know, what do we do with this? Well, it's work in progress, obviously, and the data will build over time and give us much richer analysis. But ultimately, and each survey will be published, but ultimately, you know, I have to do an annual report that you have to see and approve every year in terms of where we are in terms of progress. So the results of the outcomes framework over a 12-month period will be reported formally there, so that people can see how well or otherwise we're doing, and make their own judgments about it. And that will be the first time they'll have been able to do that in this kind of detailed way.
Thank you. And I think as a panel, we look forward to seeing how this continues to grow and the data continues to grow, because it's going to be very useful. Say, one is an overview just for interest, but then actually changing what we're doing on the ground in the individual districts. So, thanks for all the work on that, and thanks for the presentations. And I know members will find it useful. We can distribute that so they've got some of that data. Okay, moving on, we've got item 6, which is the police precept setting process. And I'm going to hand over seamlessly to Richard.
The microphone's on. Thank you. Apologies for, in a sense, a partial paper which sort of focuses on the precept setting process rather than any sort of substance as to what the precept or budget might be. As you probably know, there's a general election looming, and hence we've had no announcements so far from the government regarding the funding for policing next year, beyond the fact that the police pension grant, which we got to partially meet the cost of the increased employer contributions for 1920, will continue on what they call a flat cash basis, so not increased for inflation or pay awards. But that's the only thing we've had so far. We've had no indication of the level that the government would allow the police precept to increase by, nor anything about the mainstream grant funding. And grant funding is around 80% of the overall funding, so very important. So we're working in a bit of a vacuum at the present time. The significance of the police precept is that over the last 3 years, the government have allowed the precept to go up by £5, then £12, and for this year, £24. And that's a difference in cash between those of around 12 to 15 million pounds. So, you know, what they allow the precept to go by and what the Mayor's decision on the precept is very significant in terms of setting the budget for the PCC as a whole, and then for Greater Manchester Police. So at the moment we're working in somewhat of a vacuum, and towards the end of the paper we do propose that we would expect probably the second week of January, I would guess, to have something from the Home Office as to what the settlement might look like, and that ahead of the sort of formal precept discussion at the end of the month on the 28th of January, that you might find that you would wish to have a sort of extra meeting to look at the budget proposals as they then are. They probably won't be finalised by then, because there's still a lot of work to do with Greater Manchester Police looking at the options for the budget. So that's the sort of background as to why there's not a lot here, because there's not a lot to tell you at the moment, and there won't be for another 6 or 8 weeks, I would think. In terms of the process itself, probably the easiest bit is to actually look at the paper at the back, which is the sort of flow chart of it rather than the text. The process is laid out in statute. Your role in this is laid out in statute, and what the mayor, acting as the PCC, can or must do is also set out. And it starts with the PCC, the mayor in our case, notifying you of the proposed precept by the 1st of February. And in practice, you have a meeting on the 28th of January where that would happen. If you have an earlier meeting, in a sense, you can look at some of the issues that are around, but we'd expect the formal proposal. You then have the role of reviewing that precept proposal and making a report to the PCC. You can veto the proposal and say it's too high or too low, in which case the mayor can't issue his precept, but must report back to you and come back with a further proposal regarding his precept. If you say it's too high, you must come back with a proposal that's lower, and if you say it's too low, he must come back with a proposal that's higher. Now, if he makes the maximum allowed by government, and you say that's too low, I'm not entirely sure what happens at that point. That's a sort of thing that's just sort of hit me, that you would then be forcing the mayor to actually go to a referendum of the whole of the electorate of Greater Manchester, and I suspect nobody would want to do that, because the cost of that would fall on the PCC budget, and only one PCC has tried that, I think Bedfordshire, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and failed miserably and incurred a very large cost in terms of running an election for the whole county area. So that's the sort of, if you decide to veto it, if you don't decide to veto it and accept his proposal, then the PCC can sort of review your response. You can make a written response to him, and then he would then issue his precept. The practicalities are that the districts start having their council tax meetings from about the 20th of February, and that must include the police PCC component of the precept, along with the mayoral general precept, which covers fire and other mayoral functions. So in practice, we need this to be complete by about the 15th of February, although in law you've got till the 1st of March for the PCC to actually set his precept. So that's it in a nutshell, and I think that's the best description of it, rather than the text that's earlier. But it's a bit of a holding position until we know more as to what the proposals, in a sense, what options the mayor would have. Importantly, this year we have had the government's announcement about the additional officers, the 20,000 over the next 3 and a bit years. Those are being funded from Home Office. We're not entirely sure the sums of money. We've seen the sums for the current year, and that's going to be quite an important component as to make sure that the extra officers are fully funded by government rather than falling back on the precept. But beyond that, we have little information to work on at the present time.
Thank you, Richard. Open it up to any questions. I've got David and then Stephen.
It's just a practical one, thinking about last year we actually did presentations to most of the councils. Will we be able to do that with a diary of dates you've got of January, February, under the new, if it's delayed as much as this?
Nigel, thank you. Richard, can I just ask you as Treasurer, the fact that you've got a delay from central government where you're not giving that information, how does that become tricky for you? Because you're having to forward plan, do other things, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. When does it get tricky for you, that?
The PCC must notify you by the 1st of February of what the proposals are. So the closer we get to that, the more difficult it becomes. I mean, clearly work is going on at the moment, both within the PCC side, looking at the monies that are retained in the PCC office, the funding of the capital, which in a sense we're responsible for directly, and then within GMP looking at the devolved budget. So those two pieces of our work are going on, but that will arrive at an overall potential budget figure. But what we don't know is, well, what the budget might be. So how far adrift are we? And you expect we would be adrift of that. And then what are the options for closing the gap? So the longer and longer it goes on, the more and more difficult it it becomes, as I say, I would have thought by the second week of January, the government of whatever colour and mix needs to be saying something, otherwise it does become an impossible situation. We do consult the public. Last year that ran from, I think, the 11th of January. It sounds as though that's actually going to be running even later this year. So I would have thought, second week of January at the very latest. Beyond that, it gets almost impossible. For council services, it's a bit easier because they have had a technical consultation on the settlement. They've got some vague ideas of what the budget would look like. And probably 3 or 4 years ago, we had the final settlement for councils after people had set their budgets, but you had to work on the basis of what you've already been told. We've been told nothing, so we've got nothing to start with. So, I think it's going to be a bit of a rush job towards the end, and talking to the Deputy Mayor earlier today to start to put some meetings in with the force so we can start to sort of shape what things might look like. But it is, if the government say that, that's what the budget will be. If the government say something else, that's what the budget may be. In terms of the first question on the consultation, I wasn't aware that people had gone around councils in the right.
I think it was part of the consultations that we dealt with it differently in different boroughs, so I think it was part of that consultation process. Have we got any further questions on that? Obviously, it could mean that we need to schedule additional meetings into our diary to actually take this into account, and that's something I'll liaise with Steve and Bev's office to make sure that is done. I just remember a saying, strong and stable government, and giving us clear direction. I'm not sure what happened to that, but that's probably as close to political comments I can get to. Richard, I know it's probably your last time you're presenting this to us as Treasurer, and I bet you've never in the whole of your years as Treasurer of different authorities had such a complex thing, or a general election in the middle of the budget setting. So
never had that.
So it's nice to finish on a different scale. But no, thank you on behalf of the panel. Thank you for all the work you've done over the years. Certainly from a personal level, the work you do in Manchester, but certainly what you've done as combined authority for the last few years, it has been appreciated. This is probably something that you'd hate to happen, because I think you like to have all the ducks in a row to make sure what's going on. So it's not a nice place to be, but I know you're doing what you can to actually make sure we can do it in a proper and effective manner. So thank you. Yeah,
I had actually intended to retire in the summer without having to do any more budgets at all, but that's failed miserably. But yeah, by the end of December when I go, you would have hoped to have done most of the budget work, and we're clearly not in that position.
No, but thank you for all your work over the years. We're going to move on with the agenda. As I say, so I think this agreement, we've noted the process, and that if additional meetings need setting, we'll do that by negotiation. And we have got the facility within districts of having a substitute member attending, because what we have always tried to make sure during the preset meetings is that all authorities are represented, because obviously it's got an impact on our council tax bills going out from each authority. So we'll do our best on that one. Okay, moving on to item 7, which is where we're looking at one of the priorities of the Standing Together plan, and this one we're looking at is reducing harm and offending.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I have with me my Principal Officer, Alison Connolly, who's leads on this and done an outstanding job really over the last 12 months or so with the MOJ and various other really quite remarkable progress that we've made here. I'm just going to, I haven't sorted this out with you, Alison, but I thought I'd just give some headlines and let you fill in some of the detail. Okay. So this priority 2 is reducing harm and offending, preventing and reducing antisocial and criminal behaviour, including the most serious offending and terrorism, by solving problems, intervening early, rehabilitating offenders to build confidence in the criminal justice system amongst the public. And that whole area of work is really underpinned by a multi-agency Justice and Rehabilitation Executive, as we call it, which I chair, and all the agencies across GM are represented on that. And I think over the last 2 years, we have built it up into a really much stronger forum now, with a strong consistency of membership, very senior people coming from all the agencies, so that we are actually able to make decisions and make progress. It's also been strengthened by a significant development early this year when we signed a new memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Justice to take forward devolution in the justice arena to a new phase, And I think one of the developments that really partly came out of that, which I think is really significant, is that, as you'll know, after the previous Justice Secretary, Chris Grayling's, I think, disastrous splitting of probation service into two parts, the new Justice Secretary could see that wasn't working. It's been really quite catastrophic, and put forward a consultation paper to say that he wanted to bring the two parts together again. But that would be on a regional basis, so to have a single head of probation for the whole of the northwest of England. And I think it's partly because our Justice and Rehabilitation Executive Board is such a strong board now, and partly because of the work we've done with the Ministry of Justice. We put in a very, very strong bid to have our own head of probation for Greater Manchester. And because working with them, they've got to really understand in detail the model we've got in Greater Manchester for public sector reform and the strong partnership approach. To my great surprise, though, they actually agreed. And when I've finished here, I'm getting on a train and going to London. I'm going to be involved in the appointment for the Greater Manchester head of probation. This is the only sub-region in the country that will have its own head of probation. And I think it's a measure of how the Ministry of Justice see us, and the fact that within our new Memorandum of Understanding, they want to use the developing kind of architecture here around public sector reform to enable us to pilot various things, to look at what works in criminal justice, and it's you know, I think it's really quite positive. So there's four main strands to this work, which kind of cut across the commitments in the police and crime plan, and that's around youth justice transformation, smarter justice, which is about better court processes and more problem-solving processes in court rather than sending people to custody too quickly. It's about reforming adult offender management, and it's about improving the victim journey. And that's all summarised for you on page 2. By the way, we welcome any comments on this graphic format of the report. This is what we tend to do for our... and I thought rather than a whole kind of list of pages of words, it would be perhaps more interesting and helpful for you to see some of the ways we portray this graphically at our boards. Each of those strands it has a strong steering group or board underneath it, chaired by either a senior police officer or a senior relevant person from the local authorities. So I think now we could just go through fairly quickly, Alison, the headlines of what we're doing under each of those commitments that link with that work, and the enabling functions at the end. It's very detailed, so I think we'll just do the headlines. Is that okay? And then obviously open for questions.
Well, so I'll just, thanks, Bev. Just to underpin what Bev's talked about in terms of the Justice Devolution MOU, translating that from words on a page to real life action is happening and ongoing now. So on Monday I was at the MOJ talking about victims. Before this meeting, I just came off a phone call about the probation footprint. We had the MOJ to all GM Youth Justice Leads meeting today. So there's real activity going on to underpin that, despite the fact that whether it's Brexit or PERDA, things can slow up. So also to say that does demonstrate equally genuine commitment back from the MOJ to actually make things happen. So just a quick run through. We've some of the principles around the executive is also trying to pull data together to give you back evidence bases so that we can problem solve together. So we've done extensive work around analytics, including youth justice analytics. That's been shared. We've made sure there's been a pack for each district. And I've gone round personally and met with each of the youth justice leads to talk through those packs. We're also now in the process of doing it for violent crime and all crime, and that's something we'll bring back and do the same through community safety partnerships to look at the problem-solving approach. As we brought reports back to various meetings before about the Early Intervention Fund, and again, that is how we use that to build a legacy to understand how we deal with some of our most entrenched cohorts and young people at risk. And one of the things there is we're learning about is what we'd refer to as typology, which is a new way of looking at behaviour and risk. It's based on the original STEER model from Salford, and that's going to be really important going forward about how we might transform some of the way we do things rather than doing the same old, doing something different. Again, our whole system approach to women at risk, and we deliberately called it women at risk to move it away from women offenders, because actually if we're going to reach out and do early intervention and prevention, we don't need labels to stop people accessing those services. And there are quite some powerful results there in terms of not just what we've done locally, but comparisons against England and Wales, that where we're getting movement, we're moving more than other areas. There's an average reoffending rate of around 15%, which is often 10% lower than our most similar forces and metropolitan areas. That is a true whole system approach. As Bev mentioned, that also links to our problem-solving court approach, where we are really looking and trying to work through how we get people diverted at the right point in time. But equally, get the balance of the justice system. This isn't for everybody. We still need enforcement and justice to be in place. We've got a pilot on community sentence treatment requirements, looking at those who are most needy around substance misuse issues, and that's going to develop further. We've had our existing liaison on diversion system that's growing and developing, and is it right to see what we can do at that point in custody and how it reaches across the system. In terms of commitment 2, that's about our intensive community orders. Sometimes an often neglected cohort is males, and particularly males aged 18 to 25. They're difficult to deal with often entrenched problems. We've been able to maintain, despite the splits in probation and various other things, a scheme that looks to divert and provide, you know, it's quite a tough package. It isn't, none of these are fluffy solutions. So there's it is what it says, an intensive offer for our young people, and we are keeping those young males from the cusp of custody in our community in a safe way. And there is quite a bit of interest nationally about that programme, so we're hoping that that can develop further. We've been able to make significant links with our prisons. We've now got a prison governors group, got a single point of contact to go and speak to our prisons. Interestingly, when we talk about the scales of balance, we're also using polygraph on some of our most risky cohorts. So it's polygraph. So it's what other people might see as a lie detector, but it isn't that. It's much more sophisticated. If anybody wants any more information, please contact me. Happy for you to come down to the polygraph suite and see more about it. What that really is about is intelligence. So we can sit in front of an offender and do a risk assessment, and we're just relying on what they say. But if we use the right tools and techniques and get them to disclose, we're really safeguarding children and families, because we can find the proper intelligence. And so there's much more opportunity to use that for some of our high-risk offenders as well. We were hoping to do a learning event, and again, we'll come back to you for any interest in the new year. Commitment 3, resettlement from prison custody. As mentioned, I've mentioned the board, reform of adult offender management. That's where we're going to be working with all of you about you reducing reoffending boards. We're going to do, again, get a data and a needs assessment, but also bring that to district level about what that means to you and provide some more structure and support for you. And so we're in that process as it sits at the moment. We're also been able to look at that violence issue and work with our partners in prisons, because there is significant cohorts in prisons who are violent in prison, but also have links back into communities through things like drug debts and other issues. You know, it's a piece of research that we're going to get into. We work closely with the Community Rehabilitation Company, often co-commissioning, but also particularly in this area, Through the Gate. It's a new model. It is not perfect, and it needs to evolve. But as Bev mentioned earlier, that massive opportunity of having a GM footprint, we can now begin to influence what that looks like and move it more from to the gate to actually through the gate, which is what it should be. And commitment 4 is very much about out-of-court disposals, restorative justice. So Bev has commissioned a direct service delivery for restorative justice that's now being rolled out. We're already beginning to get lots of referrals in, and particularly high-risk level referrals. But that's being rolled out and across the piece. And out-of-court disposals, that's really key in terms of that gives us a particular potential opportunity, again, to divert that first point, but we have to divert people in. This can't just be a piece of paper that gets people out of the system. So we're piloting some approaches. I think we're starting a pilot in Salford shortly to see how that will work through, but that, again, that will be rolled out across Greater Manchester. There's some cross-cutting themes in delivery. One of the things I do want to mention is some of the roundtable scrutiny that we've done. So like I say, it's not just about initiatives, but when we see a problem, we do a deep dive into it, and particularly on rape and sexual assault, prosecution and local criminal justice issues. The truth is the criminal justice system is creaking, and, you know, we've really tried to look and galvanise the key partners in the criminal justice system, because we can do all these interventions, but if the system doesn't work, we can't get the right people to the right diversion or get the right enforcement in place. So that is an ongoing process, but it's certainly something that the board has taken on board. So I've done that really quickly. I'm going to pause for breath now. And then any questions?
Thank you, Alison. I think it's quite useful when we actually home in on each of the priorities and going forward. And I know you mentioned, do you like this format of the report? I think it's quite good because it actually pulls a few bits out and actually makes you want to go a bit further in. Anyway, we'll open that up to questions. David and then Stephen.
Just a quick question. Bev mentioned about the appointments of our own probation service. How will it be budgeted for, and how much contribution will come back from central government if we're getting that service? And secondly, what are the staffing consequences of that decision of having our own, which I agree with?
Sorry. Cheers, Nigel. A couple of comments and then a question, please, Nigel. Bev, to you, first of all, you should feel really pleased when you catch that train down to London, because the fact that Greater Manchester has its own footprint where you can decide how it's going to be this, that's something that's unique in itself, isn't it? To you, Alison, I'm going to tell you this. I've said it last time, and I remember exactly what I said to you last time. Do you remember when I said you could have easily ruled it out this and said, forget it in Oldham, forget it in Bury, this is a combined authorities decision, you're having it, but you didn't. You've gone around to each local authority, and I think that's really good, because in Oldham, we've had a chance to be able to shape that. But one question, though, makes me think, read the document, looking at it, and I thought, capacity. There's loads going on, there's lots and lots and lots. There's enough bodies and people around to make that happen?
So for the GM probation footprint, it's not our service as such, it is nationally funded. So in some ways you don't have to worry about that bit of the budget. I can't talk too much at the moment because we've got a non-disclosure agreement, but we will have access to the target operating model, the staffing structures, etc. So there's a regional staffing structure, which is the command structure, if you like. And they've agreed that Bev can sit on the panel to look at who's going to head that up. And once that person is in place, a GM transition board will form that Bev and people like me will sit on. And that's when we'll start to look at more detail of the staffing structure. And we can come back and give you updates when that takes place. So the timescale is the appointment of the regional director now, which will be finalised by Christmas. The GM transition board will start in about February, once the movements ratcheted through, so that will start in February. The CRC contracts are due to end in March 2021, so that's the kind of time scale of transition that we're working to. Because of the general election, there might be a slight time delay going past that, but as soon as we find out, we'll let people know. Yeah.
Only to say, I think your basic question behind that, David, is one I agree with, which is that there is a debate to be had about how nationally the MOJ carve up those resources between the rest of the North West and Greater Manchester, because and that will be done through the transition phase.
So just to say, in terms of resources, we use the police and crime team, so we use the resources from in that, and we just, I think because we've done the work around things like the needs assessment, the data analysis, it makes us focused. So we're not often describing stuff, we can move to the actual doing. But also, to be fair, GMP have also put some resources in, so the out-of-court disposals, they've put some change management resources in, and we've also got some co-commissioning from the CRC, so where we can, we leverage in other additional resources to make it work.
Thanks for that, Alison. Any further comments on this report? I think we just record our thanks, I say, and I think it's very useful. I think it's probably helpful for you as well that we're doing that that focus each meeting. So thank you for that. Okay, moving on, and this is a new thing we added to our agenda this year, which is looking at the key decisions or decision notices that you made, and it's an update since our last meeting.
I think, as members can see, most of the decisions in the last period reported here relate to money from PCC's office, from the Mayor's office, and most of them cover half-yearly amounts, either to voluntary organisations or to districts themselves for various crime reduction, diversion, activity of various kinds. The one perhaps I'd point out on the 30th of September on page 19 is the Home Office allocation for serious violence, in which of the total money that we received from the Home Office, part of it, as you know, was for the surge in police officer activity around knife crime, and that was about half of it. The rest of it was for the Violence Reduction Unit to use. And we allocated £3.1 million of that across the districts. I've seen all those plans, we've signed them all off. They're all around, targeted interventions, diversionary activity and so on. We will need to spend that money. So if you want to have a look at what's going on in your districts around that would be very much appreciated, because we do need to keep the momentum going on this and make sure that money is spent by the end of March next year, and more importantly that we get some positive outcomes from that money. I'm happy to take any questions on any of those, but that's briefly.
Thanks, very useful information. Any questions on it? Well, there we go. Okay, see, we have a rush through some of the items at the end, don't we? Moving on then to item 9, I'm going to hand over to Jeanette.
Thank you. This is the standard report that comes to every panel meeting in terms of noting the forward look for your scheduled meetings. Obviously, implicit within that is an opportunity for you to request items. If you'd like to see further items other than what's on the forward look, everything in there is what you've previously requested. I just would like to know, January already looks quite heavy, bearing in mind the precept is also on there, and that normally takes up one meeting of 2 hours all on its own. So we're going to have to take that back, have a conversation with the Deputy Mayor's office about the viability of delaying any of the items, and if that's not an option and panel members don't like that option, we might also need to put in an additional meeting or take over the steering group slot or something. So just to kind of caveat at the moment that January is looking quite heavy for you.
Any questions about Mike?
Just to say, can we make sure that IOPS remains as a standing agenda item at every meeting going forward? Maybe until the end of this, at least this municipal year. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's something we've got as a standing item, and I think we covered it under Chair's announcement, so it's always one of the first items as well. But yeah, certainly happy to confirm that. David?
Some time ago, we agreed that we would have a group looking at CCTV provision across Greater Manchester. Nothing seems to have happened.
A report did come back to districts from Lisa outlining next steps. I'll dig that back out again and send it round and ask Lisa where we're up to in terms of progress, but we did get a report on it.
And if it's something we want to bring back, we can look at doing it in the March meeting, but more than happy to do that. Any other points on there? That brings us to the, to note the meetings, 2 scheduled meetings, which is the end of 28th of January, the 21st of March. Is there any other business? I've not been notified of any. Can I be the first then to say, hope everyone has a great Christmas and New Year? We've got a general election before then, which could be, we might all appreciate it a bit more. But no, well, thanks for attending today. I think it's been a really productive afternoon, and have a safe journey home. Thank you very much.